Are Britons young giving up hope? An opinion survey shows only a third of young people will achieve their career goals and only a quarter think they will earn more than the current median wage of £30,000 by the end of the next decade. John Oxley has written a fascinating article for The Spectator about this phenomenon and points out that a disillusioned younger generation could lead to real electoral problems for the Conservative Party. And John Oxley joins me now. Good evening.
Good evening.
So let's talk a little bit about your article. You're talking about young people being disillusioned. Why are they so disillusioned?
Well, I think the young people of today have been hit by kind of a series of crises for all of their adult life. You know, if you're, say, 30 now, you came of age, you started work during the financial crisis, and since then, real wages haven't really gone up at all. Growth has been fairly stagnant since then. And in the meantime, you've had things like house prices sort of increasing at a much more rapid rate. We've got huge inflation at the moment, but you've got the accumulation of sort of a decade's worth of inflation. And they're in a position where they've been stuck with that. They've never seen a real-term wages increase. And so they're not able to build up savings, building up capital in the way the previous generations have.
Yeah, but I saw the other week there was a survey in The Telegraph which was saying that 1 in 10 young people intend never to work. Now, I don't know if they get to make that choice, do they? Because otherwise they won't be able to eat or anything. But, you know, that does suggest that your thesis is sound.
Well, I think, yeah, it does sort of play into that idea that there's sort of thought going round of what's the point of playing the game if the rewards aren't there at the end? Whether those people actually will get away with never working is a different thing. But there's a bigger sense that even if they do, even if we do, we won't end up in the same position that someone 30 or 40 years ago did.
How aware are young people of these sort of financial situations and housing and that kind of thing? Because when I was 18, 19, 20, I didn't know anything about any of that. So it does seem strange that they're thinking in those terms.
I think, particularly with housing, OK, maybe not at 18, 19, but particularly when people come out of university, as soon as you go into the rental market, you're massively aware of it. You know, I've heard stories of properties going on the market for rental, and within 24 hours there's been 80 or 90 people expressing interest. Rents have gone up massively, particularly in the post-COVID period. So as soon as you're out of that, then you're being hit by quite high rents. A lot of people at university are suffering the same thing. In some places like Bristol, Manchester, the big cities, students are increasingly staying at home because they can't afford to move out to university because of the high rent. And you see it when you go to the pub. I remember when I was a student, you could go and have a pint for £1.85. Now around London, it's £5-6 a pint.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the political ramifications of this. So you mentioned in your article that you think this is bad news for the Tories. But have the Tories ever really depended on the votes of young people?
To an extent, they have. This great myth that the Conservatives have always, as you get older, you become more Conservative. But if you look at when the Conservative Party has done really well, you look at the 1979, 1983 general elections, they also did really well with people under 25. Yeah. Maybe not as well as they did overall, but still much better than they're doing now. Even in 2010, David Cameron, he was polling sort of high 30s overall, but was solidly in the high 20s with first-time voters. Whereas now, there's some polling that suggests, even on under 40s, even under 50s, the Conservatives are looking at 10, 12% of the share.
So can they rely on that old adage that when people get older, they're going to vote Tory if they don't have anything?
That's exactly the point. The things that go along with turning you more Conservative as you get older is owning a house, so you're worried about interest rates. It's earning a bit more, so you're more worried about taxation. Whereas, I'd argue if that's not there, then why are you going to vote Conservative? You're not that interested in taxes being lower, you're more dependent on public services, and you don't have that building up capital. You're closed out of capitalism, and what's the point of a party that is a capitalist party?
So where does this leave Labour? Do you think that Labour is the more attractive option for the younger vote?
I think it is. I think that's what the polls are showing us all across the board. It's hard now, if you ask around among youngish people, to find someone who's going to be voting Conservative unless they're really sort of steeped in the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
And it opens up a huge policy angle for the Labour Party as well to appeal to those voters.
Do you think that the Conservatives have neglected the young or haven't even really cared or thought about them too much, and now they're reaping the consequences?
I think that's absolutely the case. You look at, this is a trend that's been going on for 10 to 20 years, it's been getting worse, but the Conservatives have been surviving, particularly because they're so locked down into the older person vote, the pensioner vote. You see sort of 2017, 2019, the age at which you became more likely to vote Conservative than not was sort of around the 40 to 50 mark, and that's been pushing up over about 20 years or so.
So was there something then to Liz Truss's idea of rejuvenating the economy, economic growth being her watchword, and now that appears to not be the priority?
You can't solve these problems unless you have growth. And I think the strength of Liz Truss was she did identify the problem, and she did say if we want to have more money in people's pockets, we need to grow the economy overall. But you also have to be able to deliver on that in a way that people have confidence with. And that's where she went wrong. But ultimately, if you're not growing, you're stagnating. And if there's less money to go around, then that just means everyone's getting poorer.
So if you had the reins of number 10, if you could determine which way the party should steer in order to attract these younger voters that they so desperately need, what do you think they should do?
The biggest thing is housing. That is the biggest driver of cost for young people. And there's a huge opportunity there to reduce the effect that planning restrictions have to get more houses built. Another thing is childcare. When people get a little bit older, they start having children into their 30s, it can be a huge cost for working parents. There needs to be some sort of answer on there, whether it's deregulation to bring some of the costs down, or it is support from the state for those costs. You see it in other countries around Europe that does come into play, and that does help. And that's, those two things would take a lot of the pressure off. And I think also just generally thinking about young people, young families, what they need, and really getting that sort of thinking to the heart of the Conservative Party and weaning themselves off relying simply on older voters.
I mean, might it be about getting sort of new blood? Might it be figures such as Kemi Badenoch who might resonate more with younger voters, that kind of thing? I
think what you have to do is listen to the concerns of young people, and that probably does mean a lower age of MPs. But Rishi Sunak's 42. He's not that alienated from this world.
Yeah.
But there is an opportunity there, certainly at the next election, to bring some new blood in, or to look to the younger generation within Parliament at the moment.
John Oxley, thanks very much for joining me.